Thank you everyone for coming to this talk on managing multi-cloud Kubernetes at scale. My name is Gaurav Dhamija. I'm a principal solution architect here at AWS, and I have with me John from Adobe. And I'm pretty sure most of you, if not all of you, must be using Kubernetes in some capacity in your organization. But just a quick show of hands if you do it across multiple cloud service providers. Okay, we have few brave and adventurous folks here. So in our talk today, I'll be sharing AWS perspective on multi-cloud, and then we'll be talking about some of the considerations related to multi-cloud Kubernetes fleet management. And then I will be handing it over to John, who will be talking about Adobe's experience in this space, and also share some of the learnings and best practices from Adobe's experience. So from AWS perspective, what do we mean by multi-cloud? It means that our customers are running an IT solution or a workload across at least 2 cloud service providers. And when we talk to our customers, they cite multiple reasons for this strategy. It could be their business strategy, it could be mergers and acquisitions, or they might be using a differentiated capability in a specific cloud service provider. Now, from AWS perspective, we work with them, we partner with them to make sure that they are successful. We help them build technical and non-technical capabilities across process and technology pillars. Specifically on technology perspective, what we noticed is that many of our large multi-cloud customers, including Adobe, have been investing in platform engineering and building internal developer platforms to streamline their experience across multiple cloud service providers, which is why AWS, in partnership with some of these customers, including Adobe, launched Canoe, Cloud Native Operational Excellence Initiative. Now, as part of this initiative, we not only have defined a composable capability metrics for defining the internal developer platforms, but we also offer tools, guidance, as well as reference implementation that you can use today as part of your multi-cloud journey. And it is also not surprising, as part of Canoe initiatives and discussions with our customers, Kubernetes and containers have emerged as a fundamental abstraction used by our multi-cloud customers across to streamline the experience. Now today, our focus is on fleet management, but there are also other considerations like multi-tenancy and developer experience that you need to think about. Now, from fleet management perspective, you not only need to think about cluster lifecycle management, but also add-ons lifecycle management. So you may have add-ons related to networking, security, observability on your cluster, and you need to think through their lifecycle. And also typically clusters in practice turn out to usually have different configurations based on the workloads that you're supporting on those clusters. So for example, for AI/ML workload, your cluster may have specific GPU drivers or a specific hardware that you need to support. And when we talk about multi-cloud, you may also end up supporting multiple distributions of Kubernetes itself. Now, one approach that we have seen worked well for our multi-cloud customers, including Adobe, is using GitOps-based approach for fleet management, where we see our customers storing both the cluster and add-on configuration, as well as all the securities, audit, and compliance policies itself in Git as the source of truth, and then leveraging GitOps operator like Argo CD and cloud provider-specific controllers to continuously provision and reconcile the state of their multi-cloud Kubernetes fleet. Now with that context, let me hand it over to John to share how Adobe has implemented some of these patterns at scale in their organization.
Thanks so much, Gaurav. Hi, everyone. Welcome to AWS reInvent. I'm John. I'm with the Adobe Developer Platforms team. And our mission's simple: help developers write better software faster. So when Adobe's landscape looks like this, and I assume a lot of other folks looks like as complex as this, how do you actually do that? I'm also a fan of abstraction and platforms where you need to simplify and in many cases oversimplify for your developers. So in this cake of complexity, what happens when you add yet another layer called multi-cloud? Adobe has been on a multi-cloud journey for over 15 years, and as part of that, we've had to iterate on our own approach. Fit for purpose is essential. Where you deploy applications in a multi-cloud environment must be an intentional choice. Yes, perhaps you have data residency requirements, security attestations, or integrations with a strategic partner. Likewise, we still live in a world with physics after all. Replicating state within one cloud provider, let alone 2, is inherently difficult. do not approach multi-cloud as an HA construct on its own. We still have the speed of light to deal with. Finally, our emphasis is really on platform engineering at Adobe, which means we treat all cloud providers, including our own data center, as a first-class citizen. By doing that, it enables you to meet diverse business needs along with specific technology challenges to enable developers to do what they want to do, ship code as fast as possible. So how do you get this type of consistency and uniformity in a really complex environment like multi-cloud? At Adobe, we built Ethos. Ethos was built to simplify the developer experience, so it's a consistent interface for them, regardless of that underlying cloud provider. Likewise, we want our developers to integrate and manage cloud-native infrastructure, not with SDKs or proprietary APIs. We want them to interface with infrastructure using uniform CI/CD pipelines, regardless of that cloud provider. Finally, we want our developers to focus on delivering business value, not necessarily figuring out how to apply specific security or compliance attestations, which are unique to each specific region or cloud provider. Developers just want to ship code. So at Adobe, Ethos is a pretty big deal. We're the dial tone for the entire fabric of the company. On a typical day, we orchestrate around 4 million containers. 90% of Adobe's containerized footprint runs on Ethos. That equates to around 4,000 distinct services across our own 3 clouds: digital experience, creative, and document. That footprint manifests itself into 450 independent Ethos clusters globally, which is around 30 regions, multiple public cloud providers, and multiple private data centers. So when you approach this type of complex environment and challenge, how do you engineer your way around this? We had our own operating principles that we pointed to. Our approach is rooted in one key aspect: declarative infrastructure. We use declarative infrastructure to define cluster configurations, network policies, versions, and resource definitions, which are all managed as code, typically YAML manifests that live in Git. In light of what Gaurav said earlier, Adobe has really embraced GitOps, and our entire workflow is GitOps driven, in this case using tools like Argo CD and Helm. All changes to both application state and infrastructure are made as pull requests to specific Git repositories. That enables you to have a single source of truth that allows you for automated rollbacks, continuous pipelines, and eventually automated tests to get eventual consistency with what should be in production, referencing what's in source. We also built Ethos as a modular code base. We use Helm as a package manager to deploy each of those components and each of those security configurations that allows for rapid updates, easier maintenance, and customization for different business needs or perhaps technology challenges, like multi-cloud. Finally, we really embrace open source. Cert Manager for certificate management, Cluster API for managing Kubernetes components on cluster, OpenTelemetry for our observability stack. Using open source also enables our own teams within Adobe, like Adobe Firefly, to contribute to platform. And what Firefly did was contributed their own custom pod autoscaler for their own business needs. So how did we do this? Well, there's 2 important aspects. The first one is the human or the operator. What does the human need to do? The human goes ahead and populates a specific manifest file with important key attributes: what the cluster name should be, what region it should be deployed in, what organization, and more importantly, which cloud provider should we deploy this cluster to. Taking that input from the human, what's the machinery that actually executes this? It's a Kubernetes cluster running Argo. Argo listens to signals from Git and goes ahead and wants to take the configuration, which is Git, and get that eventually to production. And the 2 key aspects that signal from Argo to actually what's in production are ACK, or AWS Controller for Kubernetes, and Cluster API, or CAPI. ACK manages specific AWS primitives like EKS. CAPI manages specific Kubernetes components, say your favorite cluster autoscaler, maybe Carpenter. This setup is not specific to AWS. You can use whatever cloud provider that you use, and as long as you adopt their own Kubernetes controller, this system will work. So what are we going to see here? Actually, this is probably the most challenging piece, is just making sure the video runs. So let's make sure, and yes, it does. So multi-cloud's easy, but playing videos is super hard. And so we're actually going to go from 0 to a fully functional deployable target within AWS for our developers. What are you going to see? It's a GitOps-driven workflow. What is Git? It's just implementing things like standard software development practices, like testing, automation, and approval mechanisms. And in that manifest, we're going to have non-overlapping IP ranges, specific security configurations, observability, and a deployment pipeline. And most importantly, a deployment pipeline not only for our developers to deploy to that target, but actually to the cluster itself. Remember, declarative infrastructure. Every cluster has its own configuration, and eventually, Argo CD wants to get what's in Git into production. You probably saw in Argo that things are in a degraded state. That's fine. Don't worry about it. The beauty of GitOps is its eventual consistency. And so as we ping pong back and forth between the Argo UI, kubectl, and the actual AWS console, I want to show you in kind of quasi-real time how we build this system, right? VPC, EKS, pods, and cluster components, all in that type of layer. In this case, we're just checking on the health of two specific important components, the Cilium operator and core DNS, and as you can see, those came up, all without having to interact with the proprietary cloud vendor console. So let's go ahead and update our clusters. Again, lifecycle management. And in this case, Adobe has updated our own tagging policy to make sure we properly attribute all of the resources to a specific ethos cluster. Again, this starts with Git. I want to call out what's not being shown to you in this type of standard software development workflow. You're not going to see an AWS CLI. You're not going to see us grab IAM roles or access keys and secret keys. You're not going to see us go ahead and update CloudFormation templates because those don't exist in other types of cloud providers. You need to put an abstraction on top of that so you can actually drive machinery to manage the environment in a multi-cloud world. As you can see, as we ping pong back and forth between Argo, what's most important is we want to get that tag applied to this specific cluster because in this case, I want to make sure I create the demo and this video for you before something nefarious happens to it. So as you can see, Argo goes ahead and picks up these the config eventual consistency. And in this case, hey, what's the tag? This is a reinvent or demo reinvent cluster in AWS. And as Argo goes ahead and process this, we'll go back to the AWS console and show you the VPC ID with a specific AWS tag applied. All right. Let's talk about decommissioning. And before everybody gets out and freaks out and say, wait a minute, you can actually delete infrastructure via pull requests? Yes, you can. But it took us many, many, many quarters to get to this level of maturity. Okay? Just like any software lifecycle that you manage through a Git-based workflow, you need to have safeguards to prevent hard deletes and accidental or error-prone type of steps. So what do? Okay, we run tests, right? Tests are good for software. Linting, we do input validation. I also want to make sure that there are no PDBs to enforce on this cluster. And I also want to check my ingress controller to make sure that there's no routes there. But again, that's all driven through software and observability. That's not driven for a human go ahead and clicking through consoles to say, hey, can I go ahead and delete this cluster? And many organizations forget about this most important piece of the lifecycle, which is deletion. Because if you don't delete, you're going to run into sprawl, waste, and security issues. And as you can see, again, no consoles. It was all driven through Git. So let's talk about the real impact of something like this. And this is a typical executive scoreboard, but it's more about just numbers. It's about, hey, what are kind of how does this work that we do transform our own development culture and lead to positive business outcomes? We deal at an enormous scale at Adobe. And when you're dealing with a fleet of 450 clusters, you need automation. So with this type of system, we're able to deploy changes across this fleet 3 times faster, and we're also able to do full Kubernetes cluster upgrades 2 times faster. We're also reducing our own provisioning time by 25%. Adobe is a fast-moving business. We have new markets that we need to go into, and building ethos clusters is essential. Finally, you should be treating this like any other product that you manage. You should talk to your developers to say, hey, how is this working out? The response from our own developers around our fleet management system has been overwhelmingly positive. So let's wrap up, and I'd love to share all of the things that we learned so you don't necessarily have to go all through the pain and trials that we did. Kubernetes is your friend, okay? And with any friendship, you need to invest. And if you don't invest, you're probably not gonna have a friend anymore. And so how you invest is in your own team. Grow your team's own knowledge of Kubernetes and get them to a place in terms of platform engineering where you need them to be. You also need to automate. It is impossible at scale to have humans signal between events to say, hey, I'm ready for the next step. You need to have GitOps-based workflows that reduce manual errors and accelerate your own delivery. There's a vibrant culture and community out there that you can adopt. You don't have to go and build all of this on your own. Adobe has gone all in and really embraced the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, or CNCF, where I'm really happy to say that last year in 2024, we were honored with our highest end user award, recognizing our own contributions back to the community. Like I said earlier, platform is product. Your end users are never going to use a system, or they shouldn't be using a system like this and exposing it, but you should be treating, not only doing regular sustaining engineering and keeping it up to date, but you should be talking to your own developers and saying, hey, do you like this system? Is it meeting the mark? How do you iterate on that? Finally, cookie cutter scales. But when I go to a bakery, I see lots of different cookies that I want to eat. And that's fine, because just like multi-cloud, every system has its own unique challenge and business requirements. You need to be ready to have repeatable stamp setups regardless of the deployment target or the cloud provider. This type of system enables your developers to be happier. Happier developers lead to happier and more productive teams. And more productive teams leads to better business outcomes and happier customers, which is what we're all interested in at the end of the day. Thanks for listening. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Gaurav to take us home.
Thank you, John. And before we wrap up, I would also like to some of the other reInvent sessions in multi-cloud track that I would encourage you to go and attend. I also would like to highlight we have a multi-cloud kiosk at AWS Village, and you can go there, live demos of what we just saw here, and also talk to some of our multi-cloud experts around your use cases. And then here are some of the QR codes with links to curated resources that you can reference for your multi-cloud journey. And last but not least, please do complete the session survey and give us your valuable feedback. And thank you again for joining this talk today.
Thank you.
And myself and John are also available off stage to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you again.